it is more likely something about them, perhaps something they have not worked through, perhaps it is a reflection on their life and their experiences than it is about you. So please always remember that when they say things like this to us. If anything, this was truly a learning experience for me, personally at least. So reframe it. Think about it that way. And the beauty of it is, and again, you guys, this is the essence of growing in grief. It changes you. You are simply not the same person that you once were. And it shifts your perspective. This is the Life with Grief podcast. The podcast that talks about and normalizes the complexities of grief, life after loss, and all this entails, and so much more. I want you to think of this podcast as a safe space where I'm a friendly face and we're just journeying through this together to figure out how to live life with our grief in tow. I'm your host, Tara Accardo. I'm a grief and transformational life coach, and I'm here to serve you guidance, support, tangible coping tools, inspiration, and some laughs along the way to help you cultivate a more meaningful, intentional, and beautiful life. But grieving or not, we're getting into countless topics here on the podcast, from coping with loss to self-development and so much more. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive right in. Hello, and welcome back to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, Tara Accardo, and today's topic I have actually wanted to tackle on here for a while. I have posted things about this here and there on social media, but I really wanted to have a dedicated episode to cover this because there are so many complexities to this and things to say about it. And I really just wanted to have a space here where we can have a very open and honest and raw conversation about it. And also to be able to give you some tools and a little bit of guidance on how to cope with this if this comes up in your grief, which it inevitably will at some point along the line. So, what am I talking about here? We are digging into how to cope with insensitive comments in our grief as we are grieving and as we are trying so desperately to navigate this journey of life after loss and everything it entails. And honestly, as if grief isn't difficult enough, insensitive and ignorant and unnecessary comments are sadly inevitable in the grieving process. And I have definitely had my fair share of things said to me. I know many grievers out there that have, people I have coached, people in my membership, people I've just spoken with on social media that were like, oh my gosh, I can totally empathize with what happened to you here. This is what someone said to me. And it's baffling sometimes because we're sometimes left wondering, do you feel like you're helping me? What are these comments adding to the conversation? How is this adding value to my life? How is this helping me through a painful and difficult time? And you know what, you guys, I don't have the answer to that, right? Because it is so situational. It depends so much on who is saying it and in what context it's coming from and all of the things. But today, I really just want to have a high-level conversation about it. I am so sure that so many of you will be able to empathize with a lot of the things that I'm saying here, or perhaps you've had things like this said to you. If you have, let's talk about it. Please let me know. Hit me up on Instagram. You are welcome to send me an email. I want to talk about this, and I really just want to support you because we're going to talk about, what insensitive comments can do to us in our grief, but really it just makes the process that much more difficult and it can really hinder our growth. So we're going to get into all of that. But to kick this episode off, I'm going to approach it a little differently. I'm going to share something a little spicy. But that being said, I will not be sharing this individual's name, of course. Frankly, I don't think they even listen to this podcast. They might not even know that I have a podcast. But they are very aware of losses become gains. They are aware of the work that I do. And all I will say is they worked with my mom at some point in her career. And they sent me this series of messages not actually that long ago. And when I tell you that it sent me spiraling a little bit, that is an understatement. I recovered. It wasn't like it set me back in my grief per se. It really just made me feel profoundly misunderstood, very judged, and really just very sad. But I had a very visceral reaction to these messages. And so I honestly just wanted to share these. And again, just in the spirit of being very open and very vulnerable, very just like, I'm here sharing my story. I really feel like this is just a perfect example of what we're talking about today. So for those who are watching this on the video version, you are seeing I'm grabbing my phone right now so I can read these messages verbatim, because summarizing them simply does not do them justice. So here we go. This individual said, I was a friend of your mother, not a close friend, for 10 years. I am not sure that your mother would approve what you are doing right now. Making grief into a business. We all have lost loved ones during the years. To go on the internet to get some kind of degree doesn't make it for me. I loved your mother. She passed away. That's it. Very sad about that. We all have to move on. Life is precious. I might delete you just because you bring up so much sadness. Let it go, for heaven's sakes. Your parents are gone. Live for your newborn and your husband. Just let it go. With many, many, many O's, sort of like from Frozen. Let it go kind of thing. I'm not done. She continued to say, my father passed away and also my mother in 1 year. What you are bringing out is not good. Stop talking about it. You are not a certified professional. I am fine right now. I lost my father and my mother and my brother. Don't tell me what pain is all about. I really know what it is. Time to let it go. You have to do the same thing. You are not the only one to lose someone. So, even just saying that aloud is, I'll be honest with you, I only looked at this one other time since I received these messages. So reading them aloud like that it's a bit triggering, to be honest. I have a lot of things to say about this. It's hard to process a message like this because this woman, she even admitted it herself, was not a close friend of my mom. I had a little background on this woman. Personally, I had really not had contact with her. By the way, these are all over Facebook Messenger, so do with that what you will. We were Facebook friends. Just to break this down a little bit, it's tough for me because my first thought was, where does she get off saying these things to me? I really did not know this woman. I do not know her well enough at all for her to make these comments or for her to reach out and say things like this to me. But frankly, even if we do know somebody well enough, this approach and this delivery was frankly just so gross to me. I really don't have a better way of wording it. Very out of line was my first thought. I was actually really shocked. I got these messages. My husband and I had just seen a movie, like in a movie theater. We had just come out. I turned my phone back on from like airplane mode or whatever, and I got these. And it was so out of left field that it caught me really by surprise. The first thing here that she's saying, making grief into a business. Listen, you guys, if you're here listening to this podcast or you see some of the things I post on social media, yes, I guess in a way am trying to create something from this because I feel as though it is my calling. I know that sounds funny, but I've said this before. I don't think I ever would have explored the grief space, working in grief with fellow grievers, helping people just like you through life after loss if I had not lost my parents, right? Most grief coaches, I would imagine, don't do that because you really have to some degree, whatever our losses are, go through it to understand it and then to take it a step further and to care enough to help people through it, you know? So more than anything, it just made me really sad because I was like, man, you are just missing the point. You think I'm capitalizing on my parents' deaths. Listen, if people feel that way, I guess I can't help that, but that is just so painful to me because that could not be further from the truth. It is because my parents died that I realized, hey, I can help others. I want to help others. I feel called to help others. And it's just funny because she seems to think that I'm just like rolling in all this money over here from coach. It's not the case, you guys, okay? In fact, so much of what I do is out of love. It's not, it's not that big of a thing. Like, listen, I'm trying to grow here. I would love for this to become something, everything that I'm doing, all facets of losses become gains. But yeah, I'm not trying to capitalize on anything here, for the record. And I would definitely venture to say that most, if not all, grief coaches aren't either, because let me tell you something, it is really heavy. And it's a lot to sit with people in their grief and to show up and be that person for someone. I am proud to do that. I am honored to do that. So again, that just makes it even sadder that someone is questioning that or the why behind it of what I'm doing. So yeah, there's that. Oh, also mentioning that, going on the internet to get some kind of degree doesn't make it for me. Okay, that's fine. Like, listen, I am not a therapist. If anybody here knows me at all, no, I am not a therapist. I have not been to school to be a counselor or therapist. Trust me, I've thought about it. I am still thinking about it, but I've also never claimed that, But I did go through education and courses and many things to become a grief coach and a transformational life coach. I am certified in those things, and she doesn't have to like it. She doesn't have to believe me, but I did those things to further educate myself because, life of hard knocks will certainly teach you some things, but in order for me to help other people cope and through their grief, I want to always be as well-informed and well-educated as I can possibly be. So the certifications come in handy with that, right? So, and by the way, I'm not going to dissect every aspect of this message. This episode is not about me and this specific message, but I just found these particular messages so interesting because there were so many things that were said that were perfect examples of insensitive comments that we might get on a one-off basis, but they all just happened to be thrown at me very quickly. So a couple more quick points here. I mean, number one, mentioning that she might delete me because I bring up so much sadness. Number one, and I hope everyone is aware of this with anything that I post or on this podcast here, if anything that we ever talk about is bringing up something negative for you, and I mean in a way that is truly hurtful, like you are not ready to hear it yet, please, you can unfollow me, you can delete me, you can block me and come back. Or if you're listening to an episode, we can, pause and come back to it when we are ready. That is the nature of grief. It is sad. Loss is sad. And whatever it was that she was responding to, I actually still have no idea what it was that she is responding to here. I don't know if it was a specific post or it was multiple or whatever. But yeah, like, go ahead and delete me. That's okay. I'm not everyone's cup of tea. I'm not trying to be. But really, more so than that was the next comment of saying, let it go, for heaven's sakes. And, saying that to me basically a couple times. I mean, that is the premise of this podcast, and losses become gains in everything that I do. There is no letting it go. And in fact, in, one of the other messages, she mentioned, it's time to move on. What is moving on, really? Please don't ever tell me to move on, and I will never tell you to move on. This idea of telling someone to move on when they have lost something or someone so great and so important to them is probably one of the just saddest and honestly most insulting things that we could be told as someone who is grieving. And I've talked about this a little bit before, but there is a subtle difference between this idea of moving on and moving forward. And I think moving forward is just a more gentle, realistic way in which we can live our life with our loss and have that be a part of our story, not something that defines us, and certainly not something that we forget, but it just becomes a part of who we are as we continue to grow and evolve and transform within our life after we have been through something devastating, right? Something potentially traumatic. So, that really bummed me out. her saying that. And the other thing too that I want to address, that this is what she said to me specifically, but I have heard this in many cases with some other grievers I have spoken to. Here she tells me to live for your newborn and your husband. And mind you, my daughter wasn't born yet. It's just interesting because this is such a perfect example of how little this woman actually knows me because I have learned to live for myself, certainly, which we all do. When we are going through grief, we do have to come back to our why and who we are as a soul here on this planet, just trying to figure it all out. But absolutely, we have people, family, friends, colleagues, whoever, that we might live for too. And I do live for my husband and my daughter. They are my family. I mean, I have extended family, of course, but they're my little family unit now. They're all I have. So I'm just sending so much love to anyone here listening who has had something like this said to them, because, to have someone tell you to let it go, let whoever it was that we've lost go, really just does such a disservice to their life and to their memory and how we want to carry them with us still, even though they're gone. And that's exactly what I personally, at least, am trying to do. And I have no doubt everyone here listening, you are probably trying to do that in the exact same way. And maybe it's a little confusing and you don't know how to figure that out right now. But guess what? That's what we're doing here together, right? It's all just moment by moment, day by day. So yeah, there's a lot about this that I could unpack. I think just the last thing I was going to say here was from her last message when she said, don't tell me what pain is about. I really know what it is. Time to let it go. You have to do the same thing. You are not the only one to lose someone. I mean, listen, we all will decide when we will or will not let something go. This is not something we can impose on anyone. Anyone. And this was the part of her messages that I just felt a bit, frankly, disrespected by, because she implied that I don't know what pain is about. That's how I interpreted it, at least, almost because she lost a mother, father, and a brother, and, or possibly so many more people than I did, which, by the way, again, without giving away too much about who exactly this is, all I'm going to say is she's from an older generation. And I will also mention was born in a different country. She is of a different culture than here in America. And, who knows? That could have something to do with this as well. Not that she's in the wrong or whatever country she's from is incorrect. It's just different in terms of how grief is recognized and coped with. I think those cultural differences are very, very important to mention. And again, it's tricky in this episode because I don't want to give too much away about the identity of this individual, but I just think that's important to mention as well. I've definitely talked about that on the podcast here before, especially in terms of unmet expectations. So, for example, we might expect someone to say or not to say something based on how we've been raised or how we have been conditioned to recognize and acknowledge and cope with grief versus not. So, her and I were just on very, very different wavelengths. But you know what? I don't have to let it go. Thank you very much, but I don't. This is just a perfect example of we cannot tell anyone else how to grieve. And, at the very last thing she said, you're not the only one to lose someone. She's absolutely right. I'm not. Sadly, I'm not. And that, my friends, is the perfect point to all of this. And this is exactly why I am doing what I'm doing. Because there are so many people out here who have lost people and they do not have the right support, or they have people just like this telling them to move on, to get over it, that it's been long enough, that what you're doing is toxic. Whatever the sentiment is, messages like this are the reason that I do what I do. So I just wanted to share that. I'll be very honest, I have more thoughts and feelings about all of that. There's more about that I could dissect, especially as a coach, especially as sort of I never want to call myself a grief expert. I guess I'll just say as a grief educator, as a grief guide, as someone who helps people through this. But let's break down some of the types of insensitive comments. So we're moving away from these messages now. But of course, some of these that I'm about to list were mentioned in here. So for example, you should be doing XYZ, should be letting it go. You should be better by now, right? Whatever it is under the sun that people say that we should or shouldn't be doing. You need to let it go. So-and-so would be disappointed in you. Basically speaking on behalf of a person who has died. I actually forgot to mention this. This woman has messaged me before. This was actually not the first message I got from her saying something to this effect, but her previous messages months prior were more tame. I'll put it that way. But as you heard in this message, and as she said more clearly in her previous messages to me, your mom and dad would be disappointed in you. Your mom would be disappointed in what you're doing right now. I was like, I cannot believe you have the nerve to say that to me. As someone who really was not that close with my mom, who didn't know my mom well enough to be able to say that. How do you know? How do you know that my mom would be sad and disappointed about what I'm doing? Who knows? She could be beaming, the proudest she has ever been in me because I'm doing what I'm doing now. Trying to make something and do something with what I have been through and with their legacy and all the things. And so, yeah, speaking on behalf of a dead person, huge no-no, not about that. Another question or thing we might have said to us, why are you dwelling on it? Or accusing us of dwelling on it for longer than we should. Someone saying, get over it by now. You should be moved on. Why aren't you moved on? Do you think this is really healthy to talk about this much? Which, by the way, I say, yeah, it is. Can we normalize grief, please? Can we talk about grief more? It is something that we all will go through. And it is so sad that it is actually not talked about more. And so, those are just a handful of the kinds of insensitive comments that we might see or hear, fill in the blank, whatever you have dealt with or whatever you will deal with. Really what I want to come back and do here a little bit and hone in on is why this can hurt and why it's detrimental to our healing journey. And finally, to close out this episode, what we can do about it, how we can cope, right? So there are a few reasons here. Number one, it can come from strangers for sure. And that can feel really out of left field, sort of like how I felt with this woman, even though I kind of knew her. She ultimately to me is sort of a stranger. So that was very strange. But I will also say a surprising amount of the time, comments like this will come from people that we actually know or that we are at least acquaintances with, because somehow they feel that they have the right to impose these thoughts and opinions and things on us, when that is just simply not the case. Grief is very individual. It is very unique. It is very sacred to each and every one of us. And really all I can say about that is that needs to be respected. So another reason this can be really hurtful and very detrimental to us is there might be some imposing views that don't align with ours, i.e., everything I just went through, which can be frustrating, but it can also make us second guess ourselves. Now, I will just speak on behalf of myself for a moment. I am in a place in my life and within my grief, and certainly within the grief work that I do, that while that certainly got to me for a hot minute, it did not sort of set me back. It did not at all make me second guess my life, what I'm doing, how I'm handling things, how I'm navigating it. I was like, see ya. And by the way, just sort of a sidebar, if anyone's wondering what came of this conversation, I probably should have wrapped that up in case anybody was curious. I essentially just responded back and said, it makes me very sad that you do not see the value in what I am trying to bring people. And I feel, frankly, that you have missed the point of everything that I do. I feel you've really come at me at a very accusatory and judgmental way. I have to be honest, I really don't appreciate that. I don't feel you know me well enough to have that be warranted. And finally, I would have loved if you would have approached me from a place of curiosity and love versus accusations and judgment. And that is really all we can do, right? Like, all we can do in life, really in any situation, grief or not, is come at people and at things from a place of love and curiosity and understanding. If she had approached that so much differently and actually asked me, hey, I'm really curious about what you do. Can you elaborate on that? I'm a little confused. What is a grief coach? Why were you called to do this work specifically? And just maybe asked me some questions, maybe got to know me a little bit before jumping down my throat like that. That could have been a very different conversation and a much more beautiful and productive one. Unfortunately, that was just not where that was going. It was not going to go in that direction. Ultimately, I just said, please don't ever contact me again. I'll be really honest with you guys. I shut that down. I was like, nope, do not need this negativity in my life. I will not have people like this who, frankly, like I said, don't know me well and also feel that they can speak to me in this way in my life. It is the last thing I need. And I'll be honest with you, prior to my parents' deaths, I don't know that I would have stood up to someone in that way. and we're going to talk about boundaries here in a little bit, but that was a very hard and fast boundary that I set real quick. So yeah, I shut that down. And it's funny too, because how she was mentioning, I might delete you. I'm going to go ahead and take care of that. And I blocked her. I'll be very honest. I just blocked her. I said my piece and I was like, I literally said, I wish you well, because listen, I'm not going to stoop to her level. I was like, I want to be the bigger person here. I really do. But I'm just going to call it what it is. Like she royally pissed me off. So I was like, nope, I'm going to go ahead and just like say my piece, say it as nicely as I can. And I'm going to shut this down. And that's what I did. And I've never heard from her again, nor does she really have a way to contact me, but wiped my hands of that, and I am happier for it. So anyway, in case anyone was wondering, that's what happened there. Okay, so another reason that insensitive comments can really be detrimental to our healing process is because it can make us feel like we're wrong, or that we're grieving wrong, or that we're a little crazy in all of this, right? Like I said, if I was not in such a place in my life and in my grief where I am very sure of what it is and what it is not and all of that. And guys, I know that is a process. This is literally why I'm a grief coach. This is why I have my membership. If you are not there, but you want help getting there, please reach out to me, because it is a process. It is a hard one to get to. There's a lot involved, and we can really second guess ourselves and how we're coping a lot. So that's the unfortunate part about comments like this too, is it can really make us feel like, oh man, maybe I really am doing this wrong. Maybe I am hung up on this still too long after my loss. And am I stuck? Am I doing things wrong? Listen, there are positive, effective ways to cope, and there are some not so positive ways to cope. And that is ultimately the goal of this podcast. It's to help you understand that and to navigate that. But that is the really unfortunate part about comments like this. And I have seen this in fellow grievers where they have really taken something someone has said to them to heart, and it's really affected them. So cautionary tale, please just remember, everyone has to stay in their own lane, including you. We can't always stop these comments from coming, obviously, right? But we can choose how we handle them. So a couple more reasons here. If it doesn't make us feel wrong in some capacity, it simply doesn't sit well, and it can be really frustrating. I mean, what I shared, perfect example, right? And when we are already maybe feeling anxious and frustrated and stressed out and all of these things that can come with grief, it's the last thing that we need to be piled on top of it all. And before we get into, kind of what we can do about it, how we can cope, I just want to say something here. Something we need to remember is that so often when someone says something that comes off as very insensitive, it is likely more about them than it is about us. It is more likely something about them, perhaps something they have not worked through, perhaps it is a reflection on their life and their experiences, than it is about you. So please always remember that when they say things like this to us. If anything, this was truly a learning experience for me, personally at least. So reframe it. Think about it that way. And the beauty of it is, and again, you guys, this is the essence of growing in grief. It changes you. You are simply not the same person that you once were. And it shifts your perspective. And when situations like this arise, this is a perfect opportunity and a perfect example of a way that we can choose how we deal with it. Do we choose to be the bigger person, like I tried to be at least in this situation? Or do we lose it? Or, you know what I mean? We have choices. We have these beautiful choices in front of us. And I know it doesn't always feel that way. And again, if you are earlier on in your grieving journey right now, please just take all of this in. Keep it in the back of your mind. As always, we're always planting little seeds here. But that is something I have personally found about 3-4 years out from losing my parents. And it has been a really empowering mindset shift for me, knowing that I have the choice in how I allow comments like this to affect me. And there was a time earlier on where I did allow them to affect me. I would stew on them for days. I was really resentful of the person. It brought me down to such a negative place and to such a low frequency. And I was living in such a low vibrational space. And the more it happened and the more that I evolved with my grief, the more I realized, like, nope, I am not allowing that in anymore. I do not need this toxicity. I do not need people like this. I mean, again, perfect example, right? So something to consider. Real quick interruption here, and then we'll get back to this episode. If you are someone who is experiencing some form of loss and are trying to navigate the complexities of grief, which you likely are in some capacity if you've stumbled upon this podcast, then this message is for you. If you haven't heard about my Life with Grief membership and community yet, this is truly something you need to check out. This membership is here to guide you into living a deeper, more meaningful, and full life after experiencing loss. Who doesn't want that, right? I created this membership because I know what it's like to navigate and cope with grief on a daily basis, and I know the tools and support it takes to do this effectively. I've done the work myself, and I've coached people just like you to do the same. It comes down to having impactful, effective resources and tools at your disposal, having the right support around you from people who can understand and empathize with your grief, and having encouragement and inspiration around you consistently to not only elicit and spark change, but to keep it and keep the positive momentum going. Enrollment opens once a month for a limited time. Check out the details linked in the description, and I hope to see you in there. Before we start wrapping this up, let's just talk high level here about what we can do about insensitive comments like this when they come in. Number one, and this is what I had to do big time with this woman who slid into my inbox, take a deep breath. Take multiple deep breaths before reacting to the comment. And by the way, I should mention, there are going to be instances where someone just says this to our face and we might have to just take it. For me, I was reading this on my phone, so I had time before I responded or before I said anything, but this goes for any in-person situation as well. Take a moment to breathe deeply and collect your thoughts, because this can help you respond much more calmly and rationally. So getting ourselves grounded, bringing ourselves back to our breath, that is recommendation number one, always. Number two, recognize that it's okay to be upset. It's normal to feel hurt or angry when someone makes an insensitive comment like this, especially if you are already dealing with the pain of grief. That is why we might be like, are you freaking kidding me? Really? You think I need this on top of everything else? And the saddest part is some people don't even realize the insensitivity behind it. So really just allow yourself to acknowledge and validate your emotions here. And I would even take this a step further and ask yourself what this is bringing up for you. I do this sometimes when I am coaching one-on-one with people. We literally start our session sometimes with okay, what are 3 emotions, or tell me what are 3 words that are coming up for you for how you're feeling today? And it could be anything. It could be, anticipation, anger, and hope. It can literally be 3 completely kind of seemingly different emotions or feelings. And that's what I love to do, because then we get into that and okay, well, let's tackle, the anticipation you're feeling. Are you feeling a little angsty? Let's get into that. Let's talk about that. And then we go through some of the other emotions. So this is something that you can do on your own as well. And I love doing this practice because it just really enhances that self-reflection. And it builds that within us. It literally builds our emotional intelligence, which there could always be more needed out there, right? So, and here's the thing. Insensitive comments can be difficult not to dwell on or stew over or get upset about. But I encourage you to think about this in a productive way. And doing this self-reflection, that's a perfect way to do this. And honestly, that also makes us a better and more well-rounded person who is then better able to support other people as well. And, slowly but surely here, if we're all sort of doing this, it stops that cycle of insensitive comments. But doing that starts with us. And that starts with practices just like this. All right, number 3, set boundaries. I explained how I did that in this particular instance that I shared earlier. If you feel comfortable doing so, calmly let the person know that their comment was hurtful and ask them to refrain from making similar remarks in the future. Setting boundaries is super important for maintaining your emotional well-being. This is probably the most important lesson I've had to learn when it comes to dealing with insensitive comments and balancing our mental health. Because insensitive comments truly can wreck our mental health, especially if we are not in a good place, if we are really in the depths of grief, for example, if we're really early on in our grieving journey. So if there was ever a time to be really on top of your mental health and really focusing on you and what you and your heart need right now, it is now. So please set that time aside, set those boundaries, give yourself that gift. Number 4, seek support, of course. Surround yourself with supportive friends and family members who understand what you are going through. I truly hope you have someone around you where you can do this with. Talking to someone who empathizes with your feelings and can provide some comfort and validation and hopefully some support and some direction as well. So whether this is through a counselor or a therapist, y'all, I'm a perfect example. I am here for you, right? Like, I am a grief coach. This is what I'm here to do. And also with my Life with Grief membership, like that community that we're building in there of like-minded people, of fellow grievers, those are the kind of people that you might need around you. Sometimes we need a third party. Sometimes we need someone not quite so in our inner circle who can really understand what we're going through in their own way and just show each other a little bit of love and a little support. Number 5, educate when possible. The thing is, sometimes people make insensitive comments more a little bit out of ignorance rather than malice. Like, I don't know what this woman was trying to do with me, but a lot of the times people actually don't mean it to be malicious, but of course it can come off that way. So if you feel up to it, gently educate the person about why their comment was hurtful and suggest a more appropriate way to offer support in the future. So obviously I had my way of doing this. Listen, I don't know if it was perfect. I felt very attacked. I felt very victimized. You know how like in Mean Girls, like where everyone's like, have you personally been victimized by Regina George? Like, hi, my hand was so raised in this instance. But let me give you some other examples here of things you could potentially say. Number 1, listen, I think you mean well, but I have to be honest. This comment is leaving me feeling dismissed and invalidated and ultimately isn't helpful in terms of coping with my loss. Another one could be, thank you for the sentiment, but honestly, this is making me feel a bit gaslit in my grief, and it is not helping me cope with my grief properly. Another one could be, I appreciate your thoughts and you thinking of me, but this is how I need to process my grief right now. I will let you know when and if I'm open to your perspectives on how to cope. Another could be, honestly, simply listening without giving your advice or guidance is really helpful for me right now. Thank you, though. A last one here could be, I understand you're trying to find the right words, but truthfully, there simply aren't any words that can uplift me right now. I would love to just have an ear to listen and help keeping my loved one's memory alive. So, those are just some examples. Take them or leave them, word it however you'd like if you're ever in this situation. And of course, we don't want to come off as condescending at all. A couple ones in there was sort of like, thank you though. But, inflection is a big part of it. I certainly don't want to say, thank you though, as like, okay, thanks, bye. It's more like, thank you. I appreciate the sentiment, but this is not really adding any value to my grieving journey right now. So thank you though. I appreciate it. You know what I mean? That kind of vibe. So number 6 here, focus on self-care. Always, always, always. Grieving is emotionally exhausting. So prioritize self-care activities that help you feel grounded and nurtured. So self-care, super buzzword. I don't just mean manicures and pedicures and whatever else here, although listen, if that helps you, more power to you. What I want to really just hit home with here in this level of self-care is that grounded and nurtured thing I just said. So this nurtured aspect is especially important because insensitive comments like this that cut deep can make us feel very raw and very vulnerable. And oftentimes we have to be the ones to nurture ourselves in these situations. And we sort of have to nurture ourselves through this. And that can be really hard, especially when we are earlier on in our grief, or there has been something that has come up recently that is really making our grief very prominent again. So, just think about what this could be for you. This could include things like spending time in nature, really getting your feet on the ground again and getting really grounded with the earth. Practicing mindfulness or meditation techniques, engaging in hobbies that you enjoy, seeking professional counseling, of course. I know a lot of people are kind of like, how is that self-care? But like, seriously, like I said, I mentioned mental health. I am not joking around about this. Like, comments like this, like I said, you guys, I've seen it. It has set people back. Please seek out the help. And lastly, just engaging in activities that bring you joy and spending time with people you love around you. So last 2 here really quick, and then we will close out this episode. Number 1, redirect your thoughts. I've talked about this a little bit already, so I won't harp on this, but when you find yourself dwelling on these insensitive comments, if they come your way, try your best to redirect your thoughts to a more positive or constructive thing or topic. I've already talked a little bit about how we can do this, but I just want to reiterate, being able to really take that power back and put it within our hands and choose how we want to take a comment like that, or how personally we want to take it, or whatever it is. And those comments this woman gave me, those really cut deep for me. I really took some of that personally. And honestly, it really sent me into a little bit of a spiral, because I was like, oh my God, are other people seeing me this way or whatever? And eventually, I think it's really important to just get to a place in our healing journey, which is continuous, right? And getting to a place in our grief where we can just say, you know what, my grief, it is sacred to me. And how I cope with it and how I handle it, that is within my power, that is within my hands. It makes sense that they can cut deep. It makes sense that it makes us second guess. And it makes sense that it can hurt us, because who wants something negative said to them, right? So I don't want to invalidate anybody here. Like, it's okay to feel hurt by these things. But the beauty of it is we do not have to let these people get the best of us. And we can choose how we want to move forward and how we want the narrative to go. Nobody can strip that from us. Nobody can take that from us. Very last thing here, and I hope this goes without saying, but give yourself grace. Remember that it is okay to have good days and it's okay to have bad days while we are grieving, and even outside of grief. That is the nature of life. So be kind to yourself and allow yourself the space to feel whatever emotions come up for you without any judgment. Remember that you are only human. You are going through a very human experience, one that is painful and exhausting and draining and very raw and vulnerable, like I said. And I just want to say here, if you ever have had any kind of comment like I brought up today or anything under the sun said to you that hurt you, please know I'm thinking of you. I'm sending you so much love, and I'm so sorry that you have had to endure that on top of everything else that you have already been through and that you will continue to go through. It is not fair. It's not fun when it happens, but I really hope you took away from all of this today that we can control the narrative. We can control our mindset and our thoughts around it. And while it might get to us for a few minutes, it might get to us for a little while, sometimes that's really hard to avoid and we can't always help that. We can choose how we let it affect us, but moreover, and almost more beautifully, how we can then show up as a better, more supportive human being for other souls on this planet too, right? Because that is all any of us are. We are all just here wandering around trying to figure it out. No one has the right to make you feel any type of way without your permission. So I hope you remember that today, my friend. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. I really wanted this to just be very conversational. Like I said, just very open and honest, but also hopefully constructive in some of the things that we talked about in terms of how to cope and how to navigate this. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please let me know your thoughts. I always love hearing from people. And if you found it helpful at all, please share it with someone else who could use it. I really want to spread awareness about this. But moreover, I really just want to be able to help whoever I can if they find themselves in a position like this. It is not a fun place to be, but no one is in it alone. All right. So with that being said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I will catch you in the next episode. I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. I'm so grateful you're here and for the steps you are taking to heal your heart, open your mind, fulfill your soul, learn, grow, and evolve, and move through this crazy thing called life in big, beautiful, impactful ways. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, ways to work with me, to shop my daily journal, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Life with Grief Podcast. I love seeing new faces, meeting new people, hearing your stories, and supporting you however I can. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you haven't left a rating or a review, please do so. I would so appreciate it. Or if you feel so inclined to share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. I'll catch you in the next episode.